Jonboy Meyers, how are you doing today,
good
sir?
Dude. Nice seeing you again. Fist bump. Hey, what's going on?
We're here at Long Beach Comic Expo. For all the people that may not know your past, what have you worked on in the past?
Oh man, I've been in the comic industry now for probably professionally for 16 years. If you count all my free independent stuff I did back in the day, that's about 20 years. So I've done everything from like Battle Pope to Spider-Man to She-Hulk.
Did you just
X-Men.
say Battle Pope?
Battle Pope, yeah, like Robert Kirkman.
Pope, like
no, yeah, Battle Pope. Before Walking Dead became a thing, both Robert Kirkman and Tony Moore had a book called Battle Pope that they did, and it's about the Pope who actually the rapture happens and he gains superpowers and becomes Earth's protector. So he's a buff old guy who kills demons.
And I'm guessing this is through Image, correct?
No, that was through their own imprint called Funkatron back in the day. So like my first 4 years of independent stuff was mainly through Robert's Funkatron and Robert and Tony's Funkatron imprint. We did things like Double Take and Ink Punks and things like that.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, well, life of the guy breaking in is lots of free independent stuff. But it's kind of interesting because a lot of the guys that I came up with now, they're doing so many great things. It's really nice to see those guys really getting their due and having like creating Walking Dead and Invincible and it's a real treat to see everyone take off. It's like, wow, that's cool, you know.
Yeah. And on top of it, it's so great seeing an artist and be able to link up with someone, and it seems like those doors are always left open to be like, hey, like here's certain projects that are coming up.
Oh yeah. It's kind of weird because like everyone thinks comics is a big thing, but it's really a very small industry.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say a cottage industry, but everybody pretty much knows everybody, and you know, like people you met at shows or used to do shows with, now they blow up and do other things. You never know when you like, hey dude, you know what's that guy doing? Oh, he's doing this stuff. Like, hey dude, like you want to do something? Let's do this. And so it's all cyclical. It all comes back, so which is kind of nice. So.
Recently, you had I believe we established it was an 8-issue.
I think 8 or 9 issue run on Spawn.
Yes.
I was working in video games at a San Diego Comic-Con 2 years ago. I was working at a company called Riot Games. They do a game called League of Legends, and I was there for about a little over 2 years.
Just a little game called League of Legends.
A little game. They do one game. One game, but it's huge. So,
yeah.
It's like kind of getting kind of fed up with it and kind of tired of like working on projects. And that's a whole other story, ladies and gentlemen. But a great company. Just, you know, for me, I like creating content, and they're not really big on creating content, so decided to leave and was in talks with DC about doing comics, and I had done a fill-in issue on Supergirl and a Huntress fill-in issue for them. And
Sterling Gates, which you guys will be able to see that interview as well.
Yep. Todd McFarlane was actually walking around the show 2 years at Comic-Con, and I was like, oh, everyone knows Todd. I'm like, hey, dude, what's up? Here's my book. And he flipped through it, and we had a really nice 20-minute talk about comics and influences and stuff like that. And I decided it was great to give him some of my work and shake his hand, and that was it. And he goes, oh, this is really nice stuff. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. Then a couple weeks later, I got a call from Todd, like, hey, I'm relaunching Spawn. Do you want to work on Spawn? I was like, really?
Is that a real question?
Yeah, I was like, well.
Who's punking me right now? Because this isn't cool, man.
I was kind of torn because I was already leaving video games. I was going to work on a book over at DC. Like, I think originally I was supposed to work on Red Hood and Arsenal, I think.
Okay. With
I think with Scott Lobdell.
Yeah.
And they got Dennis Medry to do it, but he did a great job. But I'm like, you know what, Spawn, Tom McFarlane. I was like, you know what, I got to do this. So
that's like you growing up in the 90s. That's like the dream right there.
Like kid in the 90s, it was either like Silvestri or Jim Lee or Rob Liefeld or Todd McFarlane or Will Spataccio or Del Keane. I mean, like all the big 7 Image guys. You're like, you know. So as a kid of the 90s, like, and those guys are like, oh, you know. So, you know, I'm like, of course, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So what we did was, it was probably we talked for about 2 months, and we had a guy at the time named Brian Wood on the team who was supposed to be the writer on it. We talked about direction and where we wanted to go, and Brian wanted to go in a certain direction, and I think both he and Todd weren't seeing quite eye to eye on the direction of the book, and Brian's like, well, you know what? It's cool, no problem. You know, it happens in comics. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna bow out. So, so during that time, we looped in Paul Jenkins. Paul is an amazing writer. Worked on Inhumans with Jay Lee and done numerous other things. He's working on a book called Out There right now. Replicant over at Aftershock. Really great book. If you haven't picked it up, really check it out. But we all actually sat down, Paul, Todd, myself. We talked about direction of the book and things like that. I worked on some concept stuff. And we had a really good look for Spawn that we wanted to go. And the thing about it is Spawn's such a seminal character. For me, I don't like following convention as far as, like, I don't like repeating a lot of what other artists have done.
Yeah.
It's like if I was going to do Spawn, I'm like, hey, look, dude, like, this is what I'm going to do with the character. I'm going to change him up a little bit. Like, Capullo gave him teeth. I'm going to give him more Fang-type teeth.
Yes.
It's going to feel like Venom, but I'm like,
he's
hey,
actually going to have a mouth this time.
He's going to have a mouth. We're going to give him a sword. Like, let's do something. I want to do something different with the characters. And when people look back on that run, like, oh, well, yeah, you know, Jonboy's run, he had the teeth in the sword. And, and like, that's the thing as an artist. You want to stay true to what's there in canon already, but you always want to add a layer onto it to kind of like, because you want your runs to be memorable. Yeah. You want to stand out. You don't want to just kind of like merge in.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, like, when a band does a cover of a song, you could either play it exactly the way it is and be like, oh, well, it was a cover, or you could make it original. A perfect example would be anything Sublime ever covered. It was like they made it Sublime. So you made Spawn your Spawn.
That's my Sublime. So.
Which is amazing with that sword, too, because it was ridiculously huge, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, it almost felt like Final Fantasy status.
The thing about it is like comics, you want to do things that are a little bit over the top, because I think what Paul and I wanted to establish was, like, in this world, there's so many normal people that Spawn should be the anomaly that stands out. So everything on him is big. Everything is aggressive. Everything is over the top. So any character that comes through, like, there's no one that's going to be a little bit more over the top than Spawn. There has to be where the character reads as something special. Because if everyone's running around wearing costumes and look awesome, if everything's awesome, guess what? Nothing's awesome. So we wanted to make a concerted effort to say, hey, look, this is what makes this character special, you know? And for me, it never felt right for a character like Spawn to carry around guns. And I know that it's like, well, the dude has, like, demon powers.
Yeah, he doesn't need it.
He doesn't need a gun. I just make this big sword. I just cut you up because, you know, you get shot. I can heal it doesn't, like, I'm like, why would you do that? But that's where my head goes. But, you know, guns are cool. Not saying, I mean, guns on Spawn are cool too. Just not my thing. Yeah. But
how did you feel when the idea was brought up that they're like, you know what, this time around, and it wasn't a reboot because it was technically a resurrection,
right?
With the idea that we want to bring back Al Simmons.
Well, Todd had been already working on that for a while now. He was just trying to identify the right team to bring it to fruition. Yeah. So he said, hey, look, you know, we're gonna, you know, I think Jim Daly was the guy who was, I think Jim Daly or something.
We'll go with Jim Daly.
Yeah, that sounds right. So his name is Jim. We know that. So he was a white guy who took over Spawn, and Spawn had angel wings and stuff. And I'm just like, dude, this is booty. Can we use that booty from the 90s? It's whack. So
it was funny because when it was introduced, like, we got like, look, do you like black Spawn or white Spawn?
It's always like a black and white thing. This East Side, West Side violence has to stop.
And it wasn't even intentional. It was just these, like, when anybody asked you, like, oh, I'm reading Spawn, they'd be like, oh, do they still have white Spawn? Because I didn't like white Spawn. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. But it's funny because it was like, it's white Spawn and Al Simmons. You're like, oh, you know Al Simmons? Like, no, we love Al Simmons.
All the white people in the world are like, oh.
Oh, come on. Come on.
No, I understand. But, like, for me, like, I agree. Like, I'm a stickler for canon, and, like, when you think of Spawn, you think of Al Simmons. And for me, it's like, let's make that character interesting. Todd wants to bring him back to, like, let's bring him back to his roots. So in Resurrection, it was really important for us to say, hey, look, he comes back. He's flesh and blood. And I think Todd kind of changed that since we left. But for us, he was flesh and blood, mortal again. So he could be hurt. He could get his arm chopped off, things like that. And he's not burned up like a weenie. Like, this guy, he's a special ops guy. He's going to wear a hoodie. He's, you know, his suit's going to turn into a coat. Like, he can walk around people. He kind of stays in the shadows, but he blends in now. But he's not a guy crying about his ex-wife in a dark alley for, like, you know, 200 issues. We didn't want to do that. It's like, this is a special ops guy. Like, I grew up around military people, special ops people. I know how these people act. I know how they think, how they talk. They're not like that. They don't act like that. You know, they don't. It's like, for me, it's like, this is what these guys do. They kind of retreat into alcoholism or things like that. They kind of internalize, but they don't, like.
They're in the depths of the world. They're not really, like, out and about. They're in the shadows. Just, you know, not really hurt upon themselves, but definitely just like, look, like I just kind of want to be alone. I just kind of want to be reserved.
Right. They usually retreat into the woods or do things like that, unless like you have PTSD issues. That's different. Then those are different issues. But usually, like that's kind of what we want to do is like bring this guy into the light a little bit. So, yeah, I think it worked out pretty well. It was pretty well received. People were really excited about it. And let's say, kind of reversing, we'll go reverse a little bit. So we had done Resurrection already one with Brian, but things weren't working out, I think, story-wise between Todd and Brian. So Brian decided to leave, and which is cool. I mean, in comics, it happens all the time. So, but I'd already drawn Resurrection. But when Paul came on, we were like, okay, you know what? Let's get rid of this, rewrite it. I think Paul wrote it in like 3 days, because it was like constant phone calls to Todd, like, hey, we're going to do this. So we did it, got it done. Went to press like a short time later. We're like, whoa, you know, like
barely made the deadline.
Barely made it and did it, and I mean the rest, I guess, so they say, is history. Like Paul stayed on for another couple issues, but Paul also runs a movie studio on top of working in comics. So we said, hey, it's time for me to move on. So Paul left, and then Todd decided to take over writing duties. And I think after Paul left, I think 3 issues after that, I decided to leave because DC came knocking and said, hey, you know, we've got some stuff. Again, they come knocking again, like, hey, dude, like, I have a lot of friends at DC, and they're like, you know, door's always open if you want to work on a project. We have this thing in the works that we want to do. Yeah. It's really big. We can't really tell you what it is. Like, are you interested in coming over? I'm like, yeah, man, yeah, you know what? Like, sure. You know, I've done 1.5 years on Spawn, or with Todd for 1.5 years developing Spawn. We did like 9 issues. Yeah, why not? Let's do it. So, parted ways with Todd, and now Eric Larson and Todd are on the book, and it looks great. A lot of old school fans probably love it, so you get that 90s feel again. So I've been over at DC working on stuff. They have this really big thing in 2016. I really can't say what it is. There's going to be an announcement, I think, in March from DC. They're going to announce all the teams and projects. They've kind of talked about it a little bit.
They teased it recently.
Right, like the whole Rebirth stuff. So
it's not a reboot.
No, it's not. Actually, it's not. It's not. What it is, well, I'll let them do it, so I can't.
Yes.
But in the meantime, I've been doing a lot of covers and stuff like that with DC because, you know, working on these projects and doing like, you know, on a new book or getting issues in the can, you know, you kind of disappear for a couple months. But DC's been letting me do covers, and I got to reteam with Sterling on a Supergirl chapter.
Yes.
So
Adventures of Supergirl.
Adventures of Supergirl.
I think it's a 6 or 9 issue miniseries.
I think it's 10 or 12 actually, and
I
think so, 10 or 12. But it's serialized, so it's only $1 for digital download. So we're gonna digital download 99 cents.
Go do it.
Yeah, you can only get it digitally. It's really great, very whimsical. Same feeling in the show. Guys like Bengal, myself, Emanuela, Lupacino, a lot of other talented people. Sterling's writing. It's really, really well done. Yeah. Very, very smartly done. Very, very ingrained in the show too. So if you love the show, you're gonna love the book. But that's pretty much what I've been doing. So,
now, out of sheer curiosity, so you did work on the specific issue of Resurrection, correct?
Yes, correct.
So, whose dog was that you drew?
Okay, so that was so Paul and I. Paul's just a genius when it comes to like kind of throwing things out of left field, and he's like, hey, you know, what about this? And you know, like Spawn's in purgatory, kind of punishing himself, you know. Because he's been gone for 5 years, so he's got a lot of time to think. And he's like, you know what? He's punishing himself. And then Paul's like, you know, he's going to meet God. I'm like, well, you know, well, maybe could God be something different than just this or that?
Yeah.
And Paul has a dog named Sprocket. He goes, well, you know, we could do something. I was like, well, can he be a dog? He goes, yeah, like I've got a dog named Sprocket. So we based God off of Sprocket, Paul's dog, who's in the book.
That will infamously be known as God.
Right. Well, it's basically like, because God, the idea is if God's going to visit you and have a conversation, he's going to come back to something that you know and recognize and something that you love. So you'll accept it. Like, hey, look, like I came back as your dog that you were as a little kid. So, hey, what's up? High five. And we were going to do a subplay on dogs and cats because, like, if Paul could have stayed on the book longer, we were actually going to have Satan. There's a cat that's in the book. If you look in Resurrection, there's always a cat floating around in the book. That's actually Satan. So Satan's a cat, and that's actually Paul's cat. It's actually Paul's cat, and nobody actually ever picked out because we never, like, Todd didn't want to go in that direction, so we ended up kind of killing it, but which would have been sad. But like there's this cat that follows Al Silman's around too. So every time you see a cat, that's actually Satan following Al, and the dog is following Al as God. So these guys are kind of watching Al, because Al's coming back and he's going to be the champion of mankind. He's there to close the portals between heaven or hell.
Yeah.
Because it's all about free will, and God's like, you know what? I'm tired of people interfering. I want people to choose to follow good or evil, to follow us or not.
Yeah.
And Spawn, you're there to close all the portals. So he's there to close all the portals, kill all the demons, and let mankind decide its own fate.
Yeah.
So, and it was supposed to end up with this big showdown between God and Satan. So it's like dog versus cat, and then they have a big
That's
showdown.
so awesome.
It would have been odd, dude. It would have been so.
Would they have had
awesome.
superpowers or anything too?
Probably would have been. That would have been awesome, like a cat dog fight.
It's like Dragon Ball Z, but with a cat and a dog.
It would have been like Paul would have done something unique with it. But the idea, the interplay between the hate between cats and dogs, and you find out that it's God versus Satan. It's kind of like we're always doing he's doing cool stuff like that.
That's awesome.
So,
That's great.
Yeah.
So go ahead and make sure to watch out for Jonboy stuff in the next in this upcoming year.
Yeah.
And of course, last
year
but not least, where can we find you on the interweb?
Oh, interwebs. You can find me at jonboymeyers.com. Jonboy007007 on Twitter and Instagram, or just Google Jonboy Myers, and you'll get a lot of information on me to access websites and stuff like that.
All right, thank you so much, man.
Dude, thanks for having me.
Thank
Have
you.
a great show, guys. See ya. Peace.